Hello and welcome to Sideline Story, your destination for sports news, analysis and discussions. I'm Yang Guang. This week we're diving deep into the biggest storylines from the European football season. How should we really define Arsenal's long-awaited Premier League triumph? What is Pep Guardiola's biggest legacy at City? To unpack the questions, I'm joined here with my fantastic co-hosts Tian Yu and Brandon Yates. Alright, let's start with the biggest game of the European season, the Champions League final showdown between Arsenal and Paris Saint-Germain. Tian Yu, when you close your eyes and picture this final, what does it actually play out? And who is one single player you trust the most to flip the script?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a really high level and intense, back and forth final. Arsenal just lifted the trophy, the long-awaited trophy after more than 20 years. So I think mentally they are in a completely different stage. For weeks, they were kind of carrying huge amount of pressure. But now that the pressure is gone, I think we'll see a more relaxed Arsenal side. And I think that's when this team looks the most dangerous. And I also kind of agree with Luis Enrique's comment about Arsenal, that he said that without the ball, Arsenal might be the best team in the world. I think if they can survive PSG's early pressure in the final, especially in the first half, I think they will have a huge chance to drag the game into their own rhythm. And once that happens, I think Arsenal's biggest weapon comes in, which is their set pieces. I think a lot of fans hate that style, but you can't deny how dangerous Arsenal can be in their, set pieces. PSG have reportedly been doing some special training to deal with Arsenal set pieces, but I think Arsenal always seem to come up with new routines. But that said, you simply cannot underestimate PSG. Their attack is terrifying. Arsenal probably, won't have much time on the ball. All my predictions about Arsenal just depend on one thing, which is they can survive PSG's firepower. And because PSG are kind of ruthless in transitions, one mistake, one bad turnover, and suddenly the ball is in your net. From the time being, I think it's a very open and 50-50 game. As for the game changers, I think for Arsenal, I'd actually say Louis Skelly is probably probably a surprising name. I think he could be massive if Arteta choose to, start him. I really like the way Arteta, has been using him recently in recent games. I think he's almost turning him into a defensive midfielder. He's calm on the ball and he works hard defensively, and I think he can really help Declan Rice to deal with some of the PSG's midfield runners. Another name I would say is Eberechi Eze. His Arsenal career hasn't been totally smooth right now, but he's exactly the kind of player who can suddenly decide a final. One dribble, one long-range shot, and just simply one bit of magic. I think that's kind of the talent he has. For PSG, I would still go with Kvaratskhelia. He's the biggest danger from PSG, considering the fact that Arsenal's right side has injury problem around Timber and Ben White. If PSG keeps attacking that area, it could become a huge problem. Against a defensive team like Arsenal, I think sometimes you need one player who can create chaos out of nowhere. That's exactly what he does.
Yeah, he was the pickle against the Bayern Munich.
Yes.
Sadly. Tian Yu, you made his specific analysis. Brandon, what's the narrative of this final in your imagination? A tactical chess match, a goal fest, or a tense, late decided affair?
I think it's going to be very tactical early on, and I think that whoever scores first is going to have probably the biggest impact on the game. But I do think that PSG scoring first will be more impactful on Arsenal than Arsenal scoring first on PSG, if that makes sense. Because I think that if PSG are given time and space to sort of do their thing and Arsenal become a little bit desperate to try and score a goal, I think that their free-flowing attack and counter-attack and pressing on the ball, I think is going to be devastating for Arsenal to try and deal with. That being said, I think PSG seem to be better at breaking teams down than Arsenal are. So I think that looking at things tactically as they stand, I think that for me, PSG are more equipped to deal with a variety of scenarios than Arsenal are, if I look at it at this point in time. In terms of the narrative, I think that if there isn't an early goal scored, I think it is going to be a very tactical, pragmatic sort of match. And even when it is a pragmatic approach, I think it is slightly more of a level playing field. I think both teams kind of handle pragmatic approaches to the game equally. And then I think if it does remain level for quite some time, I think it's going to come down to a midfield battle. It's so difficult to call because I think both midfields are so incredibly strong for different reasons. And I think that's going to be the most important tactical battle. And then, even though I do think that PSG are more equipped to handle different scenarios that may potentially play out throughout the final, whether it's in the first half or the second half or in the 120th minute of extra time, Arsenal have a little bit more personnel depth. I suppose Arsenal's defenders are a little bit more youthful and physical than
Yeah.
PSG's defenders, but PSG's defense is so experienced. And, people like Marquinhos and a couple of other players have just kind of been there, done that, and seen absolutely everything and have just been so successful and are so confident and really suit, Luis Enrique's system. And then the attacks are also relatively different. I think that PSG, I think, are a lot faster, a lot more free flowing, I think a lot more athletic. Whereas, Arsenal's attack is a little bit more physical. They sort of rely on a linchpin in the middle to create space for attacking players out wide. But then, they've also got some creativity they've brought in Eberechi Eze and a couple of other players. So there's so many different potential storylines, so many different tactical opportunities for both teams and coaches. I think there's also so many potential outcomes. I think it's possibly one of the most, I wouldn't say it's like the most, epic show-stopping clash in a Champions League final of all time, but I don't think there's been a Champions League final for so long where there's just so many different mini battles going on that I think is going to be so exciting for football fans to watch. And I think that's going to be really, really fascinating.
True. I think the key is on the two sides. That's where PSG launches its attack. I think Arsenal should avoid one-on-one situations from Kvaratskhelia and like Achraf Hakimi if he's available. I don't see PSG have, much space in front like what they had against the Bayern Munich. Arsenal doesn't, press that high. They're comfortable sitting back to defend.
Yeah.
So I think chances are not so many for both sides. Maybe one or two set pieces will decide the title. You know what I'm talking about. Now let's talk about Arsenal's successful domestic season.
Yeah.
After years of, next season, the Gunners have finally done it. The Premier League trophy is back at Emirates after 22 years. But how we remember this success depends on how we define it.
Yeah.
Tianyu, was this a triumph of the so-called ugly football that gets the job done, or do we call it a great project under Mikel Arteta? How would you define this title-winning campaign for Arsenal?
First, for Arsenal fans, I think the answer is pretty obvious. This is absolutely a success story from Arteta. I think he took Arsenal from being a team, struggling to get back into the Champions League to now finally winning the Premier League. And I think people keep forgetting how painful the journey was. They came close so many times.
Yeah.
And they watched the trophy slip away, and they watched their rivals lift the trophy, celebrate in front of them. Now they finally made it. I honestly don't think Arsenal fans care whether people call it beautiful football.
They deserve it.
Or ugly football. Yeah. I understand why, so many neutral fans don't love watching Arsenal sometimes. And, a lot of people call it set piece FC. And yes, they can be extremely conservative in games. They've won 7 league games 1-0. That just tells you a lot about their mentality. We're not seeing a free-flowing attacking team, but instead it's a very disciplined, patient, and, very risk-averse. But personally, I think some football fans can be a little bit unfair when a team starts winning. If Arteta helps manage Real Madrid, and he actually won La Liga and the Champions League playing exactly like this, I would call him one of the best managers in the world.
Okay.
Because, winning changes everything. And the reality is, not every team can play like Guardiola's Barcelona. Everybody wants beautiful football. Not everybody has Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets. I mean, Arsenal have great players. But I think that level of creativity, what we have seen in Barcelona under Pep, is incredibly rare in football history. What Arteta did was building structure, discipline, and belief among these players. He built a team that fights for every ball, stays organized, and just never gives up. That's what impressed me the most. I think this Arsenal side feels very united and everybody understands their role. A typical example would be what Declan Rice said after the game they lost to Man City, a crucial game in the Premier League. He said, "It's not down." I think that's just a very typical example of how mentally strong this Arsenal side is. And in some ways, it actually reminds me of a little bit of what Sir Alex Ferguson did at Man United. Not necessarily tactics, because they're kind of very different managers, but in terms of building a mentality and creating a culture inside this club, Ferguson made players believe that they would win no matter what. And I think Arteta is trying to create the similar mentality at Arsenal.
Yeah, they definitely showed some resilience and a great tough game mentality this season. But I'm never a fan of how they play and this one-nillism. Yeah, that's just how they won games. I think even Arsenal fans themselves should admit it's ugly football.
Yeah.
Recently, Arne Slot made remarks that this is the first Premier League champion that has 40% of their goals from set pieces. I mean, maybe Slot is in no position to make such claims. Look at that disappointing season. But I guess part of his speech is right. If football is a game about set pieces, I don't know. But it's not Arsenal's fault, You should not blame Arsenal. They play under the rules.
Yes.
My suggestion here should be a little rule change. Maybe, for example, in corners, the offensive players should not be allowed to stand in the goal area until the corner is kicked.
Yeah.
Just to avoid, 20 players crowded into one small area and with those controversial calls and fouls. That's just a little piece of advice. Brandon, let me ask you this. Does it even matter how it looked after Arsenal finally won it? What does this title say about Arteta's place among modern Premier League greats?
He's a long way away from Premier League greats, Yang Wang. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. And I appreciate Sir Alex Ferguson's name being brought into the conversation already, but he's got like 13 titles to go, so let's calm down. But look, I think what he's been able to do at Arsenal is a combination of his success, but also, I think Arsenal's leadership at the highest level also deserves a lot of credit for bringing in Arteta and sticking with him after so many seasons of coming second and just being so disappointing, at latter stages of the season and just, watching the title slip away, which is always, very nice to watch as a Man United fan. But as an Arsenal fan and, from an Arsenal leadership perspective, I think there were so many seasons of great disappointment that seemingly were never going to come to an end. And even this season, it really looked like they were going to throw it away. And they somehow managed to turn it around. But that being said, a lot of it also had to do with, ironically, City's late fall. And maybe that also had something to do with Pep Guardiola. A lot of it is to do with ugly football. And I think that is a fair criticism, I guess, whether Arteta and Arsenal fans care, like Springbok fans. I don't think they care at all. I think there are certain elements of what Arsenal have done this season that need to be looked at. But in terms of rule changes and not rule changes, but refereeing at least, sides that do that are doing something correct, whether it be in rugby or in the NBA, teams that are able to manipulate refereeing and rules to benefit them are doing something correct. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. They're doing something that benefits their team, their style, and gets them the win. So people can criticize it all they want, but, Arteta and Arsenal were doing what was best for them and were playing within the rules, and it brought them success. And you can't blame a team for doing that. My one issue with this league title I'm trying to remember the exact game and situation. I think it was against West Ham, where West Ham's stoppage time equalizer was disallowed by VAR to supposedly a clear and obvious foul against David Raya. And for me, that was the one part of their league win this season where I thought, okay, this is ridiculously unfair, because it definitely wasn't clear and obvious. And Arsenal have been doing similar things to teams throughout the entire season that got them a lot of goals and a lot of wins. So for me, that's a little bit of a stain on their win, because I think if that equalizer had have stood. I mean, look, City went on to lose their final game, and Arsenal still might have won the league, but that was just a sign of like, wow, that's really rich coming from Arsenal. Complaining about that goal when they scored so many goals the same way. But again, that being said, plenty of Premier Leagues that Manchester United won, for example, we also, won 1-0 or, scored a last minute winner, or I know that was like free flowing, attacking, fun football, but that's also manipulating the rules. I mean, I think of that, Michael Owen winner against City where we had like seemingly 35 minutes of extra time and we were supposed to only have like 4 minutes of extra time. And, what's his name? Mark Hughes famously showing the referee that Fergie time is a real thing. And also Arsenal in their invincible season, they also won, a lot of 1-0, 0-0. There was a lot of very hard fought victories. So, look, City and Pep Guardiola came in and changed the game and absolutely blew away teams with goals, and we'll talk about that shortly. But there are a lot of highly regarded Premier League teams that achieved great success, not necessarily in a pretty way every time.
My biggest impression of Arsenal this season is that they don't panic anymore. Before we move on, here's a quick review of the biggest sports headlines in China and around the world for the past week. Tottenham avoided relegation at the expense of London rivals West Ham on the final day of the Premier League season. West Ham beat Leeds 3-0, but it wasn't enough as Tottenham secured a 1-0 home win over Everton. Spurs coach Roberto De Zerbi.
I think we deserve to stay up because we made 11 points in 7 games.
Spurs will now extend their top flight run to 49 straight seasons. Crystal Palace claimed its first international trophy in the club's history after a 1-0 win over Rayo Vallecano in the UEFA Conference League final. Already FA Cup and the Community Shield winner under Oliver Glasner, Palace also secured the place in the 2026-27 Europa League with the victory. The London club had been moved from the Europa League into the Conference League this season due to ownership-related issues and a missed deadline. AC Milan ended the Serie A season with disappointment, losing 2-1 at home to Cagliari. Milan fell to 5th place and will only settle for Europa League football next season. Spain will travel to next month's FIFA World Cup with plenty of Barcelona players, but no one from Real Madrid. Defenders Dean Huijsen and Dani Carvajal were among the Real names to miss out. Luis de la Fuente played down the absence of the club's players.
Soy seleccionador nacional, yo no miro la procedencia de ningún jugador.
I'm the national team manager. I don't look at where the player is coming from. I only consider whether the player has the potential to play for us.
It's the first time that Spain will go to a World Cup without a Real player on the squad. Neymar missed Brazil's first pre-World Cup training session to undergo medical exams. The 34-year-old forward has not represented his club Santos since May 17th due to swelling in his right calf. He reported to Brazil's training base on Monday, but didn't participate in ball work with his teammates. The New York Knicks have reached the NBA Finals for the first time since 1999 after completing a 4-game sweep over the Cleveland Cavaliers. Jalen Brunson earned Larry Bird Trophy as the series MVP.
It's an honor to be here in this city and for this organization and this with my teammates. And obviously these guys have my back.
New York is on an 11-game winning streak. China's Zheng Qinwen suffered a shock first-round exit at French Open, falling 6-4, 6-love to qualifier Maya Havalinska. Zheng committed 32 unforced errors against just 5 from the opponents. Zheng reached the quarterfinals at Roland Garros last year. Kimi Antonelli has won his 4th straight Formula One race at the Wild Canadian Grand Prix. The 19-year-old extended his championship lead to 43 points after Mercedes teammate George Russell retired with engine failure. Lewis Hamilton took 2nd for Ferrari, overtaking Max Verstappen. Welcome back. Now, Pep Guardiola has left Man City after 10 years in charge. Pep departed after winning the League Cup and FA Cup for the club this season, making his silverware count in England to 20, including 6 Premier League titles with Man City and the club's first ever Champions League title. What a journey for him. Tianyu, when we look back at Pep's tenure at City, what single element will stand out as his biggest legacy? And to make it personal, pick one iconic City game that you believe captures Pep's genius more than any other.
Well, yeah, what a manager, man. Honestly, I've never seen A coach so obsessed with football in the best possible way.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
In the best possible way. I mean, he didn't just bring trophies to Man City. I think he completely changed the way English football thinks about, about the game. I think before Pep arrived, the Premier League was still very physical and very direct. There were a lot of long balls, a lot of intensity. But after he came in, suddenly everybody wanted to control the ball, wanted to have possession. They want to press higher and, build from the back. We started to see inverted fullbacks, positional football, and, midfielders dropping to the back line. And all these ideas became normal because of him. He's one of the true, football innovators of this generation. Together with Jurgen Klopp, I think they kind of pushed the Premier League to another level. Their rivalry basically became the standard for modern football. Critics of him will say that City only succeeded because of money, and yes, I think the financial backing obviously mattered. But I think money alone doesn't create a dynasty. Plenty of rich clubs kind of fail. What he did is that he turned Man City from a club that only knew how to buy, stars into a club with a real football identity and culture. And now you've got an entire generation of young fans growing up watching City dominate and, play football. I think that's probably his, biggest legacy. And as for the most iconic match, as a Real Madrid fan, I have to mention the 2022-23 Champions League semifinal. That was honestly one of the most one-sided elite level games I've ever watched. Man City completely destroyed us. It's just waves after waves of attacks, and we could barely touch the ball, and it felt just suffocating.
Right. What makes you remember about Pep the most is what, hurts you the most,
yes.
Maybe. Pep to City is like, for me, is like Ferguson to United and Arsene Wenger to Arsenal. Even decades long after their departure, you can still feel the mark of them in the teams, except Arsenal has got rid of it. But City, in the foreseeable future, will stay with Pep Guardiola's football philosophy. His footprints will never disappear at this club. I think that's the biggest asset. He gave this club its unique identity and team culture. It's something his predecessors like Mancini, Pellegrini, Mark Hughes failed to do, no matter how many titles they won for the club. Pep to me is like the godfather of City. Brandon, what's the biggest legacy Pep left at the City, and which game of Pep, when you replay them in your head, make you think, okay, that's why he's the one?
I think the biggest legacy is that he's still 7 titles behind Sir Alex Ferguson. Let's start with that. He's got 6 and Ferguson has 13. So let's just start with that little note. But in terms of what he's done for Manchester City and English football has been truly remarkable. I think since Ferguson left English football and Pep Guardiola came in, he has changed English football culture forever. Even though things have sort of evolved from just a purely possession-based game in terms of the way that clubs organize and play and the impact that his team had on the league, I think that Guardiola has probably, in the modern era, has probably been the most influential coach that the world football has probably ever seen. I think, before Guardiola, positional play was not fully normalized in England. And then after Guardiola came in, all Premier League teams wanted to do what he was doing. And I think that was also massively to the detriment of Manchester United when they tried to sort of deal with and counter what Pep Guardiola was doing at City. So things like inverted fullbacks, build-up triangles, high pressing structures, possession as defensive control, and extreme tactical detail did not work for a club like Manchester United and still doesn't work for a club like Manchester United. That is something that Guardiola brought in and did to an extremely psychopathic degree, in terms of the detail and the obsession with football. It was truly remarkable, and he deserves, beyond his impact on the style of football, some of the records that he's broken, he was able to replicate Manchester United's treble. and he did something that Manchester United have never done, which is win four Premier League titles in a row, in a more competitive league as well, and that was monumental. I'm not going to touch on the 4-0 win against Real Madrid again, because that's obviously, I would say, the most iconic game. To do that in the Champions League, I know it's away from home, not at the Bernabeu, but to do that in the Champions League against Real Madrid anywhere, that is a truly remarkable result, and I think that's going to go down as probably his most iconic individual result, I suppose. Of course, since his not retirement, but his leaving Manchester City, I would say that he is definitely the most impactful coach, but I still firmly believe that Sir Alex Ferguson is the most impactful manager that the Premier League has ever seen.
Right, let's see how City will look next season with a new chapter, and if Arsenal can build a dynasty of its own after the Premier League triumph. With that, we end this episode of Sideline Story. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to Sideline Story and leave your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information, you can also check our website at radio.cgtn.com. Until next time, stay on the sidelines with us.